today's lesson is 12.5, adding and subtracting on the number line. The objective for today is that I will use the number line to add and subtract fractions with like denominators. First problem that we're going to take a look at says Sammy has 6/8 of a jar of red paint. He uses 2/8 of a jar of the paint on a model airplane. What fraction of the jar does Sammy have left over? So for this one, I will be using a number line. So if I'm looking at my fractions, the first thing I want to do is figure out what the actual problem would be. So if he has 6/8, I know that that is the fraction I'm starting with. He's going to use 2/8 of it. So essentially, I'm trying to figure out what my answer would be. I know because I have the same denominator, that means my denominator must be 8 in my answer. Now, I know most of you can look at that fraction because we've already done subtracting of fractions with like denominators. You can look at it and figure it out right away. But again, we're going to try some things that are a little bit different so that we can use other resources like number lines to help us when the problems get a little bit harder. So for this number line, if I'm looking at my denominator, that tells me how many parts to separate my number line into. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. If we remember from our previous unit, the one whole is always equal to two parts that are the same. So this would be equal to 8/8. So I have the entire number line. I have every part of my number line. So I have 8 of the 8 total. Well, so for this one, I'm going to start with my 6/8. I'm going to switch colors so you can see where I'm starting. So I'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I'm going to start at 6/8. I'm subtracting 2/8. So that means I'm going to go back 1, 2. So I'm going to end up here, and now I need to figure out what spot that is on my number line. Well, I see that as 4/8. So he has 4/8 of the jar left over. So sometimes you might be given a number line and you have to write the problem part. So for this next one, we're going to do the same thing we just did, and we're going to create a number line based on this problem. So let's look at it. It says that Mark starts to ride his bike to Juan's house. After 6/10 of a mile, he gets a flat tire and he must walk 3/10 of a mile. What is the distance from Mark's house to Juan's house? Show your work on a number line and simplify if you need. Well, I know he's already gone for 6/10 of a mile. And it looks like he ended up going 3/10 more. So when I hear the word more, when I read that, it tells me that it's going to be addition. Again, so this time my denominator is the same, so that's going to stay the same in my answer. But on my number line, because I'm looking at tenths, I have to separate my number line into tenths this time. So I've got 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So this would be one whole or equal to 10 tenths, because anytime I have one whole, it's always the same number on the bottom and the same number on top. So if this time it's going to look a little bit different when I plot it on my number line, because I know he's gone for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6/10 of a mile. So this time I know he's gone 6/10. He goes 3 more, and so now I have to figure out what spot this is, which would be 9/10. In your notes, you should have at least the number lines with all of the problems solved. Use it as a visual. So taking a look at this one, we are seeing very similarly to what we did on our previous problem, but it looks a little bit different. So to draw a number line for tenths, which is what we have right here. Start at the 0 and move 3 spaces, showing that you're adding 3/10. Okay, then move 6 more spaces to show that we're adding 6/10. So when I'm going to the right on a number line, that's kind of my clue to know that I'm adding. If my number line or the arrows are going to be going to the left on my number line, that's my clue that we are subtracting. So for this one, if I just looked at the number line that they gave me, I look at where I'm starting, which was 3/10. I know it looks like we're starting at 0, but when I'm adding, I look at the first spot that it ends up at. So I would start this with 3/10. And then I see that I'm adding 6/10 to that. So this one I would be figuring out what would be my answer, which again would be 9/10. A little bit different type of a problem than we did previously, but ended up with a similar answer. So for these ones, we are going to actually write an equation that goes with what the number line says. So again, if I'm adding, I figure out which is the first arrow. So the spot where the first arrow is at is 1/4. Now, whatever fraction it ends up at, that's actually my answer. So that's not how much I'm adding to it. So this is the part that's a little bit different. So I have to figure out how many hops it took. So it took 2 hops, which not just 2, I'm looking at fractions, it was 2/4. So my answer for number 1 would be the fraction I started with, which was 1/4, plus how many hops it took me to get to the final answer, which was 3/4. So 1/4 plus 2/4 equals 3/4. Please have these written down in your notes as well. Now for subtraction, also a little bit different. So on this one, I have where I start, which they tell me here I'm starting at 7/10. So my largest number has to go first. So same thing with fraction. I'm starting at 7/10. I'm subtracting something to end up at 4/10. Wherever the arrow ends in these type of problems, that tells you what the answer is. And your job is to figure out how many hops it took us to get there. So for this one, I took 1, 2, and 3 hops to get to 4/10. So 7 minus 3 does give me 4. So the actual answer is 7/10 minus 3/10 equals 4/10. Let's take a look at these problems. I would like for you to try number 6 and number 7 in your notes. Don't worry about simplifying right now. I just want you to write the equation that we would get for 6 and 7.